Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Michelle Rosado and I work at the Connecticut State Department of Education in the Performance Office. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to participate in this webinar. This is part of a series of webinars that the Connecticut State Department of Education has designed for districts. We want you to know that the staff at the CSDE is here to support you in every way possible. And we hope that you and your families continue to be well during this time. So the topic of today's webinar is a review of Governor Lamont's executive orders related to education. And I just want to remind you all that you are in listen-only mode for the entirety of the webinar. However, we want you to feel free to ask any questions that you might have as they come along. You'll notice in the webinar controls, you have a place for questions. So please type your questions into that part of the webinar features, and questions will be addressed by the presenter at the conclusion of the session. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be posted to the CSDE's website. So today we're really lucky to have Jessa Mirtle, our Department of Education Legal Director here. She's going to take you through the executive orders in detail. And here's a little bit about Jessa on this slide, but she's the legal director and she's in charge of providing counsel to the State Board, Commissioner of Education, and other stakeholders. And she is really going to get into detail about this topic with you. So, all right, Jessa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and I want to echo the thanks for taking your time to be here with me today, and also sending best wishes, as I know that this is a difficult time for everybody for different reasons, and that we all have lots of things keeping us occupied, so thank you for joining me today. As indicated, I'm the legal director for the State Department of Education, and the purpose of today's webinar is to provide an overview summary on Governor Lamont's executive orders, with a particular attention on provisions that will impact schools and school communities. As always, this summary should not be interpreted as legal advice, and I want to note that I'm not going to cover every detail of the orders, but try to focus on those that may most significantly affect your day-to-day as individuals in our school and municipal communities. So as you know, after the March 10th, 2020 Declaration of Public Health and Civil Preparedness Emergencies, the governor has issued a series of executive orders as a result of the coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19 outbreak in the United States. These executive orders, in many instances, change some of the legal statutes and expectations that we have come to know and challenge us with a lot of new legal issues. The first executive order was issued on March 12th, 2020, Executive Order 7, and this was the initial order limiting gatherings to 250 people. I think that's important because we'll later address how that has significantly changed over time. And this also provided an initial order related to the requirements for 180 school days with a waiver process for short-term cancellations, which was subsequently clarified. And as everyone is familiar, the initial concept for a short-term cancellation allowed for a waiver for certain districts that were providing certain distance learning opportunities. And subsequently, that waiver was much more broadly applied. Governor Lamont was busy and issued his second executive order on March 13th, 2020, Executive Order 7A. This authorized the Commissioner of Public Health to restrict entrance into nursing homes and similar facilities to protect those who are most vulnerable to COVID-19. And while that may not have directly impacted the school community, it certainly impacts the families that we interact with, and also again indicates the focus on safety and health-related concerns. March 14th, Executive Order 7B was issued, and this one is a little bit more significant to our communities because it modified the Freedom of Information Act public meeting requirements to allow flexibility in meetings such as Board of Education meetings. And the order suspended certain requirements and allowed public agencies to prohibit in-person access to meetings, which is significant. Boards are also permitted to hold meetings remotely by conference call, video conference, or other technology. But the executive order created some additional requirements in order to allow for those video conference meetings. These requirements included notice and agenda posting to describe how public individuals could get access to those virtual meetings. Materials related to the virtual meetings need to be posted at least 24 hours before and be available during the meeting for public inspection, as well as after. It's necessary for public to view and listen in real time via phone or video. And the meeting must be recorded or transcribed and posted within 7 days. Perhaps most importantly, and one of the things that I think we're all becoming accustomed to now that we're spending more time on these virtual meeting sites, is that speakers need to clearly state their name and title before speaking in one of these virtual meetings. And that applied for every time the speaker speaks. This executive order also began addressing some of the shortage issues around hand sanitizer and personal protective equipment, and also allowed for some more flexibility to increase the availability of childcare. Executive Order 7C was issued on March 15th, 2020. This is when the governor canceled all classes for at least 2 weeks, which you know has been extended to at least April 20th, with the possibility of a future extension. Of note, while safety limits continue to be primary and may require very limited use of school buildings, the governor's order did not close school buildings. Rather, it canceled classes. This order also anticipated the impact of school cancellations on other parts of the school communities, and therefore it provided authority to Commissioner Cardona to temporarily waive graduation and courses of study requirements, timelines for educator certification, including teacher, substitute, and administrator certification, timelines related to a teacher evaluation and support, and timelines related to employment and in-service trainings and professional development. As you likely know, some of those flexibilities have been exercised while others have not yet been exercised. In particular, there have been guidances issued from the Commissioner's Office on educator certification and related to teacher evaluation, waiving those evaluations, but there's not yet been guidance or flexibilities issued around graduation and courses of study requirements or employment tenure or termination requirements. Executive Order 7C also addressed budget deadlines for municipalities and for regional boards of education. And this may directly impact our communities in a number of different ways. The Regional Board of Education budget deadlines generally are scheduled prior to and including May 15th, may be extended. They may be extended by order by up to 30 days. They may also alter or modify these schedules and deadlines pertaining to the preparation, submission, and action on a proposed budget. The municipal deadlines are important to note because they may impact the Teacher Negotiation Act deadlines as well. And that's an additional consideration that we are in communication with OPM, the Office of Policy Management, and the Governor's Office to ensure that there's clarity around that. This order also allowed a regional board of education to alter or modify schedules and deadlines pertaining to preparation and submission of proposed budget and deliberation of or actions on said budget by the legislative body or fiscal authority, including public hearings, publication, final budget adoption, and referendum. Executive Order 7D was issued on March 16th, 2020. This one, again, is a little bit less direct impact on the school community, but I think is important to review because it further restricted some of the things that our families and communities are accustomed to by only allowing social and recreational gatherings to be held to fewer than 50 people and closing bars and restaurants to all service except food and non-alcoholic beverage takeout and delivery. It also closed gyms, fitness centers, and movie theaters. The importance of this order is the impact that it may have on communities understanding the seriousness of the pandemic, which again was around March 16th, 2020, and also on the social and emotional health of our school communities as they lose access to some of these important recreational activities. The Executive Order 7E was issued on March 17th, 2020. This one was important because it clarified the requirement for the 180-day school year. The evolving circumstances at that point indicated, based on CDC guidance and public health input, that the cancellation of classes was likely to be much longer than we had initially anticipated. As I'm sure you recall, in early March or late February, there was discussion about even having some schools closed for 3 to 5 days to do deep cleaning, or potentially at maximum 2 weeks as a latency period. And so around March 17th, it became apparent based on CDC guidance that districts would potentially cancel classes for a much more extended period of time. Therefore, this allowed all districts to focus on their ability to provide continued educational opportunities to the greatest extent possible without the concerns around inequities and other factors related to the end date of the school year. So all schools were permitted by this executive order to end on their normally scheduled end date, so long as they provided those continued educational opportunities. And this is interpreted as the last publicly scheduled date, even if that was before June 30th of 2020. Executive Order 7F, again, continued with the closures of public entities such as shopping malls and other public amusement entities to continue social distancing efforts. It also expanded Medicaid telehealth access and clarified that the order canceling school classes did not apply to USD 1 and USD 2. Executive Order 7G was issued on March 19th, 2020, and postponed the presidential primary, which obviously is a substantial step that not all states have taken. It also suspended non-critical port operations and further expanded the availability of telehealth services. 7H, as you can tell, there are quite a few. I think we're at over 20, but 7H is one that many people will remember as extremely significant because it was the start of the Stay Safe, Stay Home initiative. This order limited workplace operations of non-essential businesses and nonprofits. Importantly, there has been some confusion over this executive order. It did not directly apply to boards of education or other municipal entities. However, there have been significant efforts to consider similar public health related activities and whether they may be possible for schools and for other municipal entities. Executive Order 7I is significant because there were many different pieces of feedback that came into the State Department of Education and the Office of the Governor related to student data privacy. This order included an important change in expectations around Connecticut's heightened contracting requirements between boards of education and online vendors. Even though Connecticut's student data privacy contract requirements are temporarily relaxed, schools do need to be aware that there are a number of other student privacy laws and considerations in the provision of continued educational opportunities that either remain controlling or are paramount. But in this case, the temporary waiver, which was authorized in this executive order, and then the subsequent use of that authorization and use of that flexibility, limited the need to contract between a school district and certain online vendors, which is a requirement under Connecticut General Statute 10-234 BB. The commissioner noted in his memo that effective immediately and for the duration of the cancellation of in-school classes, districts were permitted to bypass the crafting of those individualized contracts and instead go through the Connecticut Student Data Privacy Pledge, which is available through the Connecticut Educational Software Hub. And in signing that pledge, these vendors assert that they will comply with these data privacy protection concerns, but it doesn't require an individualized contract. And the feedback was that these individualized contracts were making it difficult to move as quickly as we needed to in these unprecedented times. There are other aspects of Connecticut student data privacy laws that still apply, and therefore the SDE is working on some specific guidance for districts around the considerations with student privacy and use of these online modes. You may also be aware that the United States Department of Education has recently issued a number of guidances related to the applicability of FERPA and student privacy considerations when it comes to use of online programs. Executive Order 7J. Oh, I'm sorry, and in my next slide, I have some of the temporary flexibility access places on SDE. And I put there the commissioner's memo on the flexibilities, and I also put a link for our performance office's coverage of data security information. I think it's important that student data privacy considerations are refreshed, and so that's a great place to find some additional information from the SDE. Executive Order 7J was March 22nd, 2020, and this expanded the ability of temporary retired workers to fill critical staffing needs and also clarified some restrictions on the operations of non-essential businesses. Executive Order 7K suspended additional court and administrative proceedings. And that's going to be particularly important as our Department of Special Ed our Bureau of Special Education continues to consider some of the questions that have arisen around some of the the administrative hearing processes that go through that portion of the SDE. And we're expecting that we should have some additional guidance on that in the near future. Executive Order 7L, dated March 24th, 2020, extended the school cancellation of classes through April 20th, 2020, unless further extended. One of the significant pieces of feedback that we have received is that the sooner we can provide clarity, or the governor's office can provide clarity on when classes may be further extended, cancellation of classes may be further extended, the better. And so I want to acknowledge that that is something that we have provided as feedback and the leadership is aware of. Executive Order 7M was March 25th, 2020, and it authorized the commissioners of state agencies to suspend or modify administrative deadlines. And again, I think that will be relevant as we review and continue to provide guidance around those administrative hearing processes that live within the SDE. Executive Order 7N limited social and recreational gatherings to 5 people. And again, we find that impactful in the school communities, particularly because of the social and emotional impact it has on families and students, but also because it indicates the seriousness with which these social distancing approaches need to be taken. And for those who continue to work within the school buildings to provide food service or distribute educational materials or Chromebooks or laptops, are aware of these heightened requirements and working on best practices to ensure that safety comes first. Before Executive Order 7N, Connecticut had applied to the federal government for a waiver of assessment and testing. So Executive Order 7N, after that was granted by the federal government, brings the Connecticut requirements into line with the federal waiver, which was granted. So this allows for a suspension of school testing assessments for the 2019-2020 school year. and also further restricted restaurant and retail operations, as well as suspended the 21-month limit on temporary family assistance. We've been working closely with other agencies to address children of all ages, including those who are not yet at school age. And Executive Order 7.0 waived birth to 3 family cost participation fees. Executive Order 7P allowed for housing for persons at risk. Executive Order 7.0 limited group sizes in childcare and increased health procedures for all operating childcare programs. As I'm sure everyone is aware, many childcare programs have either stopped providing childcare or are looking for guidance and support to provide childcare for some of our first responders, essential workers, and other individuals who retain or maintain the need to go into work. But this executive order ensured that there were some clear guidelines around group sizes and ways to ensure that those communities were as safe as possible. Next executive order was 7R, which was issued on March 31st, 2020. And I'm sure this is one that there may be some questions about because I know we've seen some already through email. This addressed funding for boards of education and clarified that the state will continue to provide funding for school boards and for staff as was expected in existing state and local budgets prior to this pandemic. However, it indicated a clear intent to continue to use those funds at a minimum to offer staff pay and health insurance, particularly to the greatest extent practicable, particularly for those folks who may need this paycheck and insurance to keep their household running. This was an unforeseeable national crisis, and Executive Order 7R indicates the clear intent to allow employees some continuity and the ability to continue to assist our educational communities in providing the services that are possible to provide virtually. It also provided for preservation of student transportation services and special education providers. School communities, including transportation special education providers, are going to need to continue to provide services during the period of class cancellation, or they may be called upon to very promptly and with short notice resume services when the public health and safety restrictions allow it. So we received a lot of feedback and input from municipal board of education and contractors regarding need for flexibility and the opportunity for individualized negotiation to best address the unique circumstances for some contractors. And therefore, this required the preservation of these services when the board determines that it's appropriate to amend a contract, so long as they achieve some identified goals to ensure staff members are supported, to safeguard taxpayer monies by avoiding unnecessary costs for items such as fuel, but also to allow smaller companies to prepare to get back up and running as soon as necessary, and continue some funding for those companies. And I think that might, I may not have caught up with, okay, I got to Executive Order 7S. I think there may have been one that was issued after I developed this slide deck. But so 7S is allowing some grace period for premium payments related to insurance policies, which may be relevant to schools, and also for municipal tax deadline relief and collection effort relief. And I know that this is a relatively dry topic, but I do think it would be helpful for us to have some conversation and to have the opportunity to have some question and answers. So I'm going to turn it back to you and take the opportunity to provide any insight I can on these executive orders. And to the extent that there are any questions that I cannot answer, we will ensure that we provide subsequent answers after this webinar.
Okay, hi Jessa. There are a few questions. The first is, does 7J apply to retired educators? If not, can we expect a waiver on the 45% rule limitations?
That's a great question. I don't know that I can answer that off the top of my head. I don't think that was specifically addressing the retirement issue for retired educators, but that's certainly something that I can bring back to our leadership and ensure that we communicate and work with the teacher retirement folks to assess if there's an opportunity to make some either guidance or flexibility around that.
Okay. Regarding 7R, what does the term active employee mean? Does this mean employees who are currently working with distance learning, or does it include those we have had to furlough due to lack of work due to school closure?
That's a great question. I think it's consistent with the questions we've been receiving around this. You know, our first line of answer there is that it depends on the circumstances, and we would encourage you to consider the employee. And the local consideration has to be what is to the extent practical mean for your Board of Education? What is the expected relationship between that employee and the Board of Education, and whether their employment would have continued but for the pandemic? It does indicate an intent to try to the greatest extent practicable to continue to employ, pay, and insure these folks. So that may include people who have been furloughed.
Great, thank you. I have another question. Do I understand correctly that executive orders have the full effect law and can be enforced as such?
Yes, these executive orders provide flexibility to the legal and statutory requirements, and for the period that they are issued are the legal requirements.
Okay. There's another question about private schools. It says, we have been advised by some private schools that their costs will go up rather than decrease. Can you advise they are including proposing costs related to mortgages, etc.? I don't understand, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the costs related to mortgages. What I can say is that, again, it's going to have to be an individualized review, but there is the intent expressed in the language of the executive order that these are intended to be actual and reasonable costs, and that the company is intended to make best efforts to avoid unnecessary costs.
Okay, I have another one. Did you ask for the 45 additional school days for B3 evals?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, do you know what a B3 evaluation is?
Did we ask for the 45-day? I think what probably is going to be best for that person to reach out to me directly, and we can talk through it.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, birth to 3. That's what she means.
Oh, okay.
Birth to 3 evaluations are a federal issue and can only be relieved by Congress. So have we asked for an extension on those?
No, we have not at this time.
Okay. Clarification on 7R paragraph 3, please. The funding of bus company driver wages is easier to understand, but the maintenance of the fleet is less clear. Do you have any more insight into that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, we can try to provide as much clarity as we can, but what we received from the folks and stakeholders who provided input on their concerns around contracts was that there needed to be some flexibility for those types of conversations and considerations to happen locally. And therefore, the way that that language might be interpreted may depend upon the specifics between that Board of Education and that specific contractor. The intent is to allow these companies to ensure that they can promptly and with short notice reserve continuity of services when the public health and safety restrictions allow it.
Thanks. Okay, we have another one. Can we assume, based on the general executive orders, that typical requirements related to health assessments for students attempting to register in our district are waived, and those students should be promptly enrolled, assuming other registration procedures are reasonably followed?
If there's a statutory requirement that hasn't been specifically waived, then no, we cannot presume that there have been any waivers related to the legal or statutory requirements. If there's a context in which that is required or maybe something that needs to be considered, I would encourage you to submit that to us in writing or provide some more information around your concerns. We have had questions about enrollment and registration, and I think that for the most part, our SDE guidance applies, which is that there shouldn't be undue burdens on individuals who are attempting to enroll, that the law requires only a verification of age and residency. But when it comes to when classes resume, allowing folks into school buildings related to health requirements, that's probably something that is at this point consistent with what it was like before. And if there's going to need to be any sort of waivers, that has not happened at this time.
Thank you. We had a couple people follow up on that, on the birth to 3, just saying that Case and some other council have requested this along with NASDSE. So we're supposed to get some feedback within 2 weeks. Okay, and then someone had a question about 7C. Please explain how ED certification timelines have been changed or waived.
Yeah, so I would encourage you to go to our website, the SDE COVID website, which, let me make sure I can give that to you, has all of the guidance that we have provided. And our certification folks did provide some flexibilities around certification requirements. So that's if you go to portal.ct.gov/SDE/COVID-19, that should lead you to all of the guidance that we have provided. And there's a document on that website that's called Temporary Extension of Educator Certificates and Coaching Permits. That guidance was published on March 26th by Dr. Tucker, our Chief Talent Officer. And it provides that effective immediately, the expiration date of all initial and provisional certificates, including interim certificates and 5-year coaching permits that have expiration dates between 3/15/20 and 12/31/20 are extended for 1 year from the original expiration date. So there's some more content in that guidance document that I would encourage you to take a look at, but they have exercised that flexibility, and we would certainly provide guidance if there were going to be any additional exercises of that flexibility.
Thanks. Another question, additional information for TRB when it is brought forward is the expanded rights under FML. We expect more teachers out on FML, and some reliable retirees have already exhausted their 45% limit. Teachers are considered essential right now and should be treated the same as first responders with respect to the retirement waivers. This has become, so I don't know if this is a question, but this is somebody was just mentioning that, and that there's more of a need in Fairfield County. So Don't know that if that was a question.
Yeah, I mean, I thank you for continuing that line of questions or comments. I can look into that more. I have not individually been involved in conversations about that, but I understand the question, which is right now there's limitations on retired teachers and educators related to their salary, and are we going to waive or otherwise create a situation where there's more incentive to have retired educators participate in educating our students while we have this drastic need based on teachers either having to take leave because of their own sickness or because they're caring for family members. So I will certainly look into that.
Thanks. Yeah, that was, I think he was just clarifying his question. So somebody has one about board meetings. Just to be clear, having a board meeting through Zoom or Meet without inviting the public to hear/see is not acceptable, question mark.
Correct. I think, again, I would defer to your board counsel on the specifics because I can think of a lot of different circumstances where there may be some details that would be necessary to squarely answer that question. But if it is a board member meeting that is a public meeting where there's a quorum and they're discussing the agency's business or the municipality's business or the board's business, this executive order allows them to happen virtually, but requires that there be public access to that virtual meeting, in addition to the other requirements I mentioned.
Great, thank you. We just have one last question, and that's, I'm not sure if you know about this, Jessa, or actually there's another. Do we know if the Teacher of the Year and the Para of the Year processes are continuing? That's something probably from our talent office, right?
Yeah, I haven't been directly involved, but I'm happy to bring it back to them. And I would, we're trying to maintain, especially the more pleasant processes as best we can. So I'll touch base with them and let them know that that was a question.
Great. So I have another 2 questions that came in. We'll just take these and then we'll wrap it up. So on 7C, there's 2 of them actually. Have teacher and leader evaluations been waived, or are we still waiting for further guidance from the commissioner?
Right. So again, if I can direct you to that SDE page, March 25th, it was indicated that the components of the educator evaluation and support plan are waived. However, I think that we're going to be providing some additional guidance on opportunities to continue collaborative dialogue and make sure that there's feedback for everybody so that we're continuing to best serve our Connecticut students. So if you check out the March 25th, 2020 memo from Dr. Shauna Tucker, our Chief Talent Officer, you'll see that there has been an indication that there will be a waiver of those requirements, educator evaluation requirements, but I wouldn't be surprised if we issue some additional guidance around how to effectively provide feedback to folks.
Great, and this is along the same lines of this, but what about for those new certifications who can't finish because they're not able to test, like for Praxis, because the testing sites are closed?
Yes, I am involved in conversations with our folks at this time about how we're going to address that. We are very aware that it seems to be next to impossible right now to actually take the test. And I know that we're coming up on the time where many people would be. So we are trying to consider the best way to approach the fact that testing may not be available and the fact that we want to make sure that those folks who are ready to enter the workforce as certified teachers are able to do so.
Thank you. That's all the questions we have. I do want to remind everyone, because I had been asked, we will get a copy of the slides posted to the COVID-19 page on our website, as well as a recording of this webinar will be available in the next few days. So I want to thank you very much. Thank you, Jessa. It's great to see you.
Thanks everybody again for all of their support and work. We know that this is a time that's causing for a lot of questions, some that don't have answers, but we're really happy to have such a wonderful community working to try to support our learners.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. You too.